Hi everyone, I'm Dale Smith, aka Journo Dale, and we're here to talk about Canadian politics. This past week, we saw the federal government introduce some new gun control measures by way of regulation, and we had some people commenting online saying, is this really the way that they should have gone about it, particularly in a minority government? And so I thought we should explain some of what we're talking about here so that we have a better grasp of what's going on. So first of all, refresher course, there's no such thing as a minority government. We may be in a hung parliament, but a government is a government, and government meaning cabinet, and cabinet is the same if they have a majority of the seats in the House of Commons or if they don't. So really, we should stop using the term minority government because it's not an accurate term. So with this in mind, what they ended up doing was pushing through a ban of a number of different kinds of assault rifles using regulatory means and an order in council. And when people ask, is this the way to go about doing it? The answer is that regulation is the way to go about this particular way of doing things and not legislation. And what I mean by that is there are already provisions in the criminal code that allow them to ban and restrict certain firearms. And they do that by the regulatory mechanism. So the bill or the actual legislation, which is the criminal code, has a provision in there that says this allows the government to make regulation around banning and restrictions. And so what the government did in this case was actually went about the regulatory process to do that. And the reason why that is largely because regulation can be a little more flexible and can be a little more granular in a certain amount of things. And it's easier for governments to deal with. So imagine for just a moment if we made the restriction that you needed to legislate any kind of ban or restriction. So you would have the criminal code full of, in this case, 1,500 new terms and conditions and so on. It was really, the 1,500 rifles that they banned was really 11 with all these different parts and accessories that for some of these were particularly modular weapons, so they just banned all these various things that people use to upgrade them. And so if they had to change that in legislation every time, which means introducing a bill, going through 3 readings in the House, 3 readings in the Senate, royal assent, it would be cumbersome and there'd be very little ability for a government to be reactive in certain cases. That's why stuff happens by regulation. There is public comment every time regulation is introduced. There is ability for different kinds of scrutiny around it, both through the comment periods and consultation periods, as well as Parliament has a joint scrutiny of regulations committee, which means that it's a few senators and a few MPs on a committee together, and they go through regulations that have been passed and ensure that they are in order and so on and so on. So that's kind of why this process was invoked, because they had the legislative authority in order to do that, and it was an issue which it would not make sense to have a piece of legislation around. The ability to do that was already in the criminal code, so there was no need for the government to do this ban as a piece of legislation. And that's important for when we're talking about, the way in which they went about doing it. Now, this having been said, the government will still need to introduce legislation to go along with this, particularly around things like their buyback program. And why that has to go through Parliament, of course, is because it means spending money, and any kind of money bill needs parliamentary approval. That's kind of one of the basis of our parliamentary system. So that's kind of why they went ahead and did it in this particular way. It's worth noting that a future government of a different political stripe can come in and through the regulatory process can add more or subtract them from these same lists. So it's not, you know, it's one of these things where, you know, any government needs to be aware that what they do can be undone by a future government using the same mechanisms by which they've done things. Which again, they did not do anything inappropriately in this manner. It's just, you know, that's the best tool for what they were hoping to achieve. And like I said, there will be future legislation to go along with this as well. So it's not like there will be no ability for Parliament to have an input such as it is. And because we're in a hung Parliament, if the other parties were so up in arms about this, at the next opportunity, they could theoretically put in a vote of no confidence for the government. But we know that two of the opposition parties are going to be largely in favor of this kind of a measure. So I don't think that's going to be a particular concern, you know, once Parliament is back to normal and, you know, we're kind of on the far side of the current pandemic situation, and we will have normal sittings once again sometime in the hopefully not too distant future. So anyway, I hope that was a helpful explainer, and that it helps you in your critiques or in your observations about this particular action from the government. And that's everything for this week. Join us again next week for some more Canadian politics. I'm Dale Smith. That's at journo_Dale on Twitter. And don't forget to like the video, to share, subscribe, and support us on Patreon. Thanks, everyone.